Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Friends of Ashley Schiff fundraiser. I am the president. I am Sharon Pochran, and I'm really pleased to be here today in the in the Zoom space that we have. We have Lauren Donovan is going to be moderating the questions. So if you have questions that come up while you are listening to Drew's lecture, go ahead and put them in the chat. When Drew is done speaking, she is going to just call on. I will unmute everybody and we'll just walk through, and you guys can ask your questions out loud if you want to. Okay, so welcome to the 51st celebration of Forever Wild. For those of you who don't know, we are the Friends of Ashley Schiff are here to support 22 acres of woods on the Stony Brook campus, which was set aside in remembrance of Professor Ashley Schiff, who was an economics professor, one of the first hires at Stony Brook University. His wife, Dorothy, is here today. We thank you, Dorothy. Oh boy. And a thing like this, a shindig like this, a party like this is never possible without a lot of effort, a lot of work. I know, hopefully this looks simple and seamless and wonderful and perfect to everybody. And hopefully by the end, everybody thinks that too, but there is a lot of help goes into a meeting like this, a presentation like this. First of all, I have to thank our technical support, Mark Lang, who is not here. And I'm pretty sure he's happy about that. But I think even 5 minutes ago, he was answering questions for me about how to manage a party like this online. So thank you, Mark. Also, if you were enjoying the beauty of our Instagram, our Facebook, and our website, we can thank Hogyam Evan Jew for that. He has single-handedly made us much cooler than we are. And we can't thank him enough for that. In fact, I don't know how we did this without him. And Hogyam, if you ever leave, I will actually cry real tears. So we're very grateful to have him here. Also, Vice President Maureen Murphy, hi. A meeting like this can't happen without a lot of phone calls between her and me, asking about etiquette, who we should invite, how we invite them. Thank you, Maureen, for all of that support. And also, this could not function. Things you never think about. Well, things I don't actually think about, but today we actually have to think about is money. And we could not keep this running without the amazing razor sharp wit of Donna, who keeps us on the straight and narrow with our spending, tells us what we can buy, what we can't buy, and how many students we can afford to support every given year. So we thank Donna for that. And also we've got Lauren, who is running the waiting room for us. We've got Melissa, I see her on here too. And I hope Paul Siegel is here because this was his ship long before it was my ship. And he was my right-hand man, taught me how to do this. All right, the other people we can't ignore are the students. Hogyam, for the first year, Hogyam is an alum. He's a Seawolf, graduated last year. He's on his way. He finished, or 2 years ago, he finished his master's degree, and he's on his way to a PhD program. And aside from making us look cool, he's also tapped into a real desire in our Stony Brook students to get involved in the outdoors, in ecology, and saving the forest. And he put together this slide right here, which is current student artwork, drawings that they've inspired by trips through the woods. So Ashley, the Friends of Ashley Schiff has two main mandates. Our first mandate is to keep our woods forever wild. We would like the legislation to pass that would give this the same protection as a state park. That hasn't happened yet, but we made great progress towards that last year. October 4th is not only Dorothy Schiff's birthday, but it's also Brookhaven's Ashley Schiff Preserve Day. We actually have a day named after us in the town of Brookhaven, which is awesome. And we can thank Valerie Cartwright for that. She was councilwoman. She is got a different name now, but Valerie made that happen, which was awesome. Our second mandate, though, is to use the woods as a living laboratory. And myself, as a biologist, I always think about living laboratories as being science. But our board is bigger and broader and more inclusive than that. And we have found ways to bring over the humanities. As this slide shows you, we've got some talented student artists and illustrators. We've got Lucy DeBetty is on our board, and she is a talented scientific illustrator. We've got students who are writing blogs about this. We have students, we have given awards to students who've written music for the park, all 4 seasons of the woods represented in classical music. Our poet, David Taylor, wrote a great poem to commemorate our 50 years, inspired by walks through the woods. So we would like to think of our park as a place that inspires all sorts of intellectual ways of being, not just the sciences, but the humanities, the arts, and maybe just being alive. This is officially, we would normally be having this at one of the venues on campus in person, and we would be calling this a friend raiser. And we would be welcoming all of our new friends to the Friends of Ashley Schiff. But I'm continually reminded that I have to remind my audience that this is also a fundraiser. And I hope to convince you by the end of this talk that we use our money for really good things. We use our money to fund student research in all of its flavors and colors. And I'll talk a little bit more about that towards the end. But to get you started, because I'm going to ask you again at the end, I feel like one of those NPR announcers. We want your money. We do. We want to use it to fund student research and student art and student music and all sorts of great student activities. You can, if you want to donate to us, I'm going to put you in contact with Donna DiGiovanni, and her phone number is there at the bottom. It's 631-632-1364. So our park, as it has become, actually thanks to Hogyam, our park has become a really integral part of campus. We, last year for our 50th anniversary, we united the scientists and the artists, and we made a huge parade of people dressed in art walking across campus to celebrate the 50th. We involve mapping projects. We involve camera trap projects. We are involved in ecological restoration, which is an aim that I personally plan to get us more involved in, especially once we get the vaccines and the pandemic under control here. This is a really spectacular park. For his honors project, Hogyam went through and looked at all of the other SUNY schools and then all the other Ivy League schools to ask how many had a resource like this. And we are one of few. And the fact that when you, and the last time you walked through our park, you saw things that are parts of undisturbed forest. You saw native species like the maple leaf viburnum, or maybe if you were lucky, you saw a chestnut tree. That's hard to see in most of the United States. It's a really wonderful piece of history. If you haven't walked through it, walk through it. I am going to hand over the floor to David Taylor right now, who is going to introduce our guest speaker. David.
Thanks, Sharon. Hi, everybody. Hope you're having a nice evening. It's a little chilly out there if you're on Long Island, but as soon as you're done with this, you'll want to go outside. I'm going to read this, so I put on my old person glasses to make sure I can read the words. I'm honored to introduce J. Drew Lanham, who is an author, poet, wildlife biologist, and one heck of a great person. Drew holds an endowed chair as an alumni distinguished professor at Clemson University. He is a board member of several conservation regional and national organizations, including the Aldo Leopold Foundation. His books include Sparrow Envy, Field Guide to Birds and Lesser Beasts, which is a book of poetry. His award-winning memoir called The Home Place, Memoirs of a Colored Man's Love Affair with Nature. And he has an upcoming version of Sparrow Envy coming out in March 2021, so get your order in now. Drew has written, "Nature asks only that we notice." Few have explored nature so carefully as Drew, who is an internationally renowned birder. But equally important, Drew has brought awareness to the problems of discrimination and justice in the we who are encouraged and allowed to notice. So when he says nature asks only that we notice, Drew is so important in understanding the balance of that sentence. So thank you, Drew.
Thank you so much, David. And thank you to the Ashley Schiff Preserve and to the Schiff family. It's great to be there while being here. I would much prefer to be able to spend time with my good friend David in his shack and warm by your eventual wood fire and have a beer, David. And I look forward to that at some point in time. But for now, we're following the science. And we're staying safely distanced and being good citizens and caring for one another. And so tonight, in light of not being able to be there and to share a celebration, really, to celebrate with you what the preserve is and all of these multifaceted ways. And thank you so much, Sharon, for that inspiring and informative talk. In the beginning, because it really sets the stage for us. It sets the stage for us to think about caring. And so, yes, I write stories. And so I'd like to share a little bit of a story with you first, if I may. And then from that story, perhaps a little bit of a challenge. So in thinking about who we are, this will be a story that, I don't know, covers about half a millennia or so, at least, and up to present time. But then we'll ask you to project beyond now, beyond the history that has formed us, in going forward and thinking about the function of the Ashley Schiff Preserve, all that it has been, all that it is, and all that it can be in the future. Once upon a time, the first people of the First Nations saw first this land and the abundance that fed, clothed, and inspired them. It was a land overflowing with wildness, a land of mast and wild honey, and it was good. Not perfect, mind you, because the first people used the land as well, but in a different way, and it was good. But then the ships came, and what had been plentifully imperfect began to dwindle, and the good began to dwindle too. De Soto and the conquistadors began the plundering and the dwindling that would go unchecked even until now. The explorers like Catesby and Bartram and Lewis and Clark saw the abundance and yet were amazed even in its waning and wrote about it. They sometimes struggled for the words to describe the plentiful wild that they encountered, rivers choked with runs of eel and shad, skies darkened with flocks of birds that broke the branches out of mighty oaks, herds of ungulates that took days to pass a single point. prairie dog towns encompassing hundreds of square miles, condors soaring, ferrets scurrying, forests dark and deep with monstrous sky-scraping trees, marshes and prairies with no apparent end. The immigrant bird artist, the neurotic bankrupt Scotsman wannabe poet named Alexander Wilson, and an arrogant, self-absorbed, biracial, slave-owning Franco-Haitian named John James Audubon painted the wonders of the waning plentiful abundance. Bird by bird, they saw the world. Through their eyes, the rest of the world began to see the natural wonders of this place, and it was good, even as it was getting worse. It was still mostly good for some. And so when one studies the evolution of us, whether we are professionals or we volunteer or spend time as hobbyists in nature, we must encounter this abundance and its waning through manifest destiny, through decades of wanton waste, to spiraling rates of extinction, to some reckoning by names we know, Thoreau and Muir and George Bird Grinnell, and the nameless bird-loving women who contemplated their convictions for conservation even as they demanded suffrage. We must consider Theodore Roosevelt and Gifford Pinchot and George Washington Carver and Aldo Leopold and Rosalie Edge and Ding Darling and FDR and Sigurd Olson, Rachel Carson, E.O. Wilson, Jane Goodall, Majora Carter, and Greta Thunberg. And those yet to be named, those yet to be born, in fact, that those before us, imperfect as they were, had some vision, some courage, a certain resolve to change some things, the grit to do better, even in the worst of times, to combat the market gunners and punt boats, to stem the deadly tide of predatory plume hunters shooting these long-legged waders off of their nests by the millions for fashion. Bison being exterminated by technology for greed and for racist rationale. Rail and repeating rifle took men west who slaughtered the herds to push Lakota and Crow, Assiniboine and Blackfoot away from their homes. Carcasses littering the ground with only the tongues removed and the remainder left on the prairie to rot. The Great Plains fell silent. No chickens dancing, no elk, no wolves, no pronghorn, grizzlies gone. Back south, land worked by enslaved was given to freedmen and then taken back, and what was left was often stolen by tax lien and institutionalized trickery. And so those who often lived first on the land and those who worked the soil even under bondage and then tried in vain by deed, by sweat and toil, they failed. The 40 acres and a mule became promises broken that became hunting plantations here in my home place. In the wake of privilege, bobwhite quail, coveys rise, dogs running swamp deer and ducks on slave-built rice marsh. It was and is here a world built for the pleasure of some. And so we have to think of this history as we consider the wild, as we consider it anywhere, south in my home place or northeast in yours. And as human beings suffered, the wild suffered all along, killed and plundered until billions were reduced to fewer and fewer. There were even names for some because the once uncountable were down to one. Martha the passenger pigeon, languishing in the Cincinnati Zoo. Incas, the Carolina parakeet, passing a few years afterwards. The last of their kind dying alone, languishing until life's last light dimmed to dark. Booming Ben, the heath hen, a bird likely at one point in time, if not on Long Island, very nearby. He boomed his last on a Martha's Vineyard dune and met an inglorious end in the mouth of a feral cat. So you see, some things still have not changed. And then a she-wolf's fierce green fire faded in New Mexico because no one had their heart's ears ready to hear the mountain cry for its life. Swamps were drained and busted, soil eroded, the droughty dust bowl erupted, the black, rich Chernozem was plowed under to blow dust from Oklahoma and Kansas into the capital's doorsteps. Old growth was cut, devastated. The great Lord God bird double rap knocked and Kent called in the din even of ravenous saws and steam engines as forestry ran amok. It too went quiet. An atom splits and collides. We are all newly threatened with oblivion. Poison and pesticides are sprayed everywhere carelessly for a better bug-free life. But it becomes death, biomagnifying death. A courageous and quiet heroine named Rachel says, think, but feel more. We try, and Martin Luther King marches for equal rights. There is no clean water to drink in Flint, toxic plumes choking the poor and people of color more. The Amazon burns. Plastic floats to make deadly new islands of Anthropocene trash. The world is warming up. Polar bears are drowning, and poor children in Appalachia cannot breathe the same dirty air. Coal, by the way, has never been clean. And yes, it's all happening, even if the deniers say that it's not. So this story, this history is past, isn't it? Not really. What we know now is that so much of what we did is being repeated. We will see it manifest again into the future and impact those to come behind us even worse if we do not act now to care. Contrary to what you've heard, yes, extinction is a verb. It's the final action word. But then, so is conservation, my friends. To conserve here or there or anywhere that we care, it is at the root of us. It is our function. It is our genesis. It is our revival. For all that has been bad, there is good that has come. Weave into the long but loosely woven history of wrongs against the wild the right that we found somehow. We found the Moral Act, the Lacey Act, Pelican Island, a hunter conservationist, naturalist president sitting lame duck and scribing huge circles around land to protect. We found the Migratory Bird Treaty Act, the Bankhead Jones Farm Tenant Act, the Civilian Conservation Corps, the Duck Stamp, Pittman-Robertson, Dingell-Johnson, the Endangered Species Act, CITES, Clean Water, Clean Air Acts, the Farm Bill, and once again, in a couple of months, the Paris Accord. All of those policies began with someone caring enough to act, to not just talk about the caring, but to move forward in some way, not just thinking about the decimation of the wild, but feeling it heart deep in a way that they would do something, that they would move someone. I think about a Sand County Almanac and its impact on me. I think about Rachel Carson and Silent Spring and the sea around us. And I think about biophilia and guns and germs and steel. I think about holy texts the Quran, the Torah, the Bible, scrolls and etchings on hides and rocks and stories and caves and around fire circles, passed down for ages. Holy words, sacred words, directives for us to notice, directives for us to care for our world and one another. I have this dream, this fantasy of Rachel Carson and Dr. King talking environmental justice and land health over bird-friendly coffee on the Penn Center marshes. I would love to wake in the morning knowing that the world would not implode by Twitterverse, but I would be awakened by the twittering of birds. And so I ask you to consider all of this, the good and the bad. I want you to imagine what it took, then imagine harder at what it's going to take going forward. What was, what is, what we changed from worse to better. I want you to consider the context, the historical track. I sometimes wonder how we saved anything at all. It's a miracle that really there's anything left. But where we are now in that undulating sine function of discovery, of exploitation, of extinction and recovery, of viral peaks, what grade would you give us on our most recent tests to inform, to inspire, to make good from bad, to make better worse, to conserve? Where does the Schiff Preserve fit in this pantheon of bad to worst that needs to become better? Have we advanced? Have we backslid? Or are we just barely holding ground? And so I ask you, what do we do now? I'd like to think of us as we gather here in virtual space. I'd like to think of us for this place and time now as this conservation convention, as this coming together of kindred spirits who can think about nurturing nature in intense ways. We're all tasked with these responsibilities of care. It might be teaching, it might be connecting in some way, someone who isn't familiar with the place that you love. Ultimately, our mission as we are gathered here is to conserve. Conservation has at its core love and care. It means that what we do here, that whether we are stewarding grasslands or wetlands or forests or shorelines or city parks and greenways or nature preserves, we are sustainability managers whose job is to nurture. We conserve white-tailed deer and black and white warblers. We conserve humpback whales. We go into the field and we come home with it in our heart. Yes, conservation's mission is ultimately to care. We have to teach that to our students, to our family, to our friends. We must investigate it. We must enforce it. We must think it, and we have to communicate it. We must feel it. And then ultimately, we must be the conservation we want to see. I sometimes ask, I wonder if we really understand what all of this means, all of this history that sometimes can be overwhelming to think about things globally, but then how do we act locally? That wrapped around the responsibility of caring is this privilege of loving. But then this necessity of loving. Do we truly grasp our place as part and parcel of all that we love, not separate from it, but tied in tightly as members and neighbors and cohabitators, standing shoulder, to wing, to fin, to hoof, to scute, to claw? Do we have that indomitable grit and psychosociological carrying capacity to do better as we descend into some unknowable conservation burrow in this new age? This new age of hopefully soon to be gone great againness, dismantling what's been assembled and disdaining by loopholed interpretation each and every environmental law day by day. I say no, enough is enough. After all, what's the cost being incurred for our profiteering? What will it net us in the end, this hyper-capitalistic undoing? And so I think in this convention where we're gathered tonight to celebrate the Ashley Schiff Preserve, to think about nature, to think about wildness, to think about all that it means to us, to think about what it means to students in the future, I do believe that we understand what's at stake. It's demanded our presence here. It's demanded your support all these years. It is, after all, why we do what we do. There is really in our business no get-rich-quick scheme. There is only a long-term, forever remembered, become enriched with each sunrise investment plan. Our stocks rise highest with each dawn chorus of weary trans-Gulf migrants that fall into our backyards. It is amortized in shad or eels that epically return to spawn in a rushing natal stream where it was once an egg after the dam has come down. Our savings are compounded with each sunset glowing red as fire on salt marsh, compounded with each loggerhead sea turtle's eons old crawl from surf to shore. Our interest accrues with every witness to the miracles of migration and adaptation, and in those dividends, we cash in treasures beyond any currency's value. But how do we keep this value? How do we reclaim what's been lost and compound the good that's been gained? So this is going to require us to not only do the best science that we can do, it's going to require doing more than we ever have in the face of decreased funding and science deniers. It's going to require us to do more than settle for policies that have already been written and promises that have been broken. We must draft new ones and we must recommit to the good. It's going to require a more zealous enforcement beyond slaps on the wrists for crimes against wildness. It will require us to fish for hope where there is no structure and hunt for a way where there seems to be no quarry left. And so this is going to demand that we stand on this bedrock of tradition that has done some good. But we're also going to have to be bold enough to recognize when we must build and stand on new ground. It means breaking down global convention that the scientists and professionals consume to render pieces small enough and palatable to the masses who vote by township and crossroad. It means this can no longer be a closed carton of homogenized good old boy effort. There's an expiration date of demographically colored change coming due, and that's coming right soon. It's time to break the complacency boxes that we've been comfortable in. It's time for us to shatter the glass ceilings over some of our heads. It's time to integrate the leadership and turn over the board tables. to open up the clubs for non-restricted access and to mix things up. I say, let's inclusively maximize our own diversity as we eagerly seek to maximize it biologically. And so this means that all of us, whatever our titles, whether we're educators or ornithologists, ecologists, mammalogists, herpetologists, biologists, ichthyologists, policy wonks, law enforcers, modelers, bureaucrats, human beings, we must all become activists towards this single cause. Because after all, this single cause is everything. It's same air, same water, same soil, same earth, same fate. Ashley Schiff preserved. The air ultimately that you breathe there, the water that you drink, the soil that you trod on, ultimately is the same that I do. And so I want you to think about this shared earth, this finite resource of this one planet that we have now here, not something that we can launch to generations from now to bespoil it, but the responsibility of this largely blue marble. And then imagine Ashley Schiff Preserve. We zoom in on that marble, and there is this space, this place, this special spot of wildness where goodness remains. And so I propose, my friends, that Ashley Schiff Preserve becomes a place of peace, a place of learning, which it is, a place of beauty. But then I want you to think of it as a place of protest. I would like to think of it as a place of peaceful protest where we can go to understand that we cannot continue the old ways, that we can't continue the old ways of exploiting, that we can't continue the old ways of excluding, that we can't continue the old ways of polluting, that we can't continue the old ways of killing, of disrespecting the wild and one another. And so this will require us to become social change agents, even as we talk about conserving wildness and a wild space. It will require us to move beyond watching, to drop our binoculars and to widen our field of view. It will require us to pull our heads up from the spring wildflower's beauty to look at what comes before us. It will require us to not only hear the birds singing in the trees and hear the frogs in the wetland, it will require us to hear those who don't have access to green space, who don't have the privilege of disposable time and disposable income to spend spare moments in nature because they have no spare moments. And so I would ask you to think of the preserve, of Ashley Schiff Preserve, as a special place of peaceful, wild protest. That when you go there, you think of your act, each step, as a march towards better. That when you give your time, your talent, your money, that give is seen as a sort of communion, a sort of offering to a better day for those yet to come. So the story that has been written, our history that we somehow keep repeating, will demand that we cannot come away from this virtual gathering and this world as it is now to somehow move forward back to normal. Let's throw that away. Let's be better in a new day. Let's move Ashley Schiff to preserve to some place of reckoning, to reconcile our humanity in the wildness, to respect it, to share it with others so that they can too. And in that gathering of same air, same water, same soil, same earth, we take this deep breath and understand that we all share this same fate. And so the story is still being written. We have a chance to right some wrongs, not to be perfect, but to be better tomorrow than we are today. To take the breath that hopefully we can fill into our lungs tomorrow in a different way, to exhort it towards better. So I am so appreciative of the opportunity to speak to you, to have friends like David Taylor, who is such a special soul to me, to have other friends there on Long Island, my friend Heidi Hutner and so many others, and Maria Brown and others that are there in that special place. I look forward at some point past this current situation to being in a better one with you there. So I look forward to our conversation, to your questions, to your comments. And please support Ashley Schiff Preserve. Please think of it again as your peaceful protest for the wild, for better, your chapter in the story yet to be written that will be better than what was. Thank you very much for your time and your patience and your ear.
Thank you for that stunning presentation. Yes, we have a question session, and I'm going to hand the floor over to Lauren, who can moderate it.
Well, I don't know, Malcolm, if you wanted to mention what you put in the chat about Muriel. There it is.
Oh, hello, everybody. This is Malcolm Bowman. I'm actually a long way from campus, but I just wanted to let you know that one of the great supporters of the Friends was Muriel Weil, and she was a pioneer at Stony Brook University. She worked for Ashley Schiff in the early days at Cardozo College. And can you hear me? And helped schedule visitors to the campus of very famous people, including Stuart Udall, who was the former US Secretary of the Interior and served under several presidents, and I think named 5 new national parks. Anyway, he came, I think it was before my time, but about 1970, and sort of blessed the preserve to be forever wild. And so I just wanted to say that. And also, I see that Dorothy and her daughter Karen are present, and I think Russell may be Dorothy and Ashley's grandson, if I'm not mistaken. But I just had a quick question about our new president, Maury McInnes, and how we might approach her.
Seems like we're having some technical difficulty. Megan, did you have a question for Drew?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes, I can, Megan.
Hi, should I type it in the chat or should I just say it? I don't know what's easier.
Just say it.
Okay. Hi, Drew. I wanted to ask, in your opinion, how do we go about making climate change policies not a party issue, but more of a human one? Because there can be people out there like us gathered here today who listen and speak out on it. But how can that change the ways of the majority if there is so, in your opinion, if there is so much distrust currently? Because I feel as though most people would ultimately agree on climate change legislation, but it would always come down to who is actually saying it.
Yeah, that's a good point, Megan. I always in my policy class, I teach my students that every policy begins with a personal agenda. And I don't care what that policy is, from the best policies that ever were, in someone deciding, for example, to not sit on the back of the bus, to the worst policies ever in someone deciding that an entire ethnic group needed to be cleansed from the earth. So when it comes to the environment, I think that old phrase, the old bumper sticker of thinking globally but acting locally, is very important. I'll tell you, I know people, as politicized as we are in society now, the first thing that the first tendency really is to bank this thing as right or left. I think for me, part of the conversation about climate change, I really have to break down from global to local, and so that folks understand. So, for example, on the coast of South Carolina, where people are having seawater, saltwater intrusion or inundation into their drinking water. There's no argument when you can't drink the water. There's no argument. Drowning polar bears are far away. And though we may care about them, a good many people have trouble seeing the relevance of a polar bear not being able to haul out on an ice floe because of warming Arctic seas to their own plight. However, again, that mantra of same air, same water, same soil, same earth, same fate. Think about the number of days in Louisiana that the weather forecaster comes on and says, the meteorologist comes on and says, it's a bad air day. If you have a breathing condition, chronic pulmonary disease, it's better that you stay inside. Well, that's an opportunity to connect that same air argument, that paradigm there, so that people understand that they are being impacted. Honestly, the environmental and conservation movement has overlooked people, especially poor people and people of color, who would be tremendous advocates for the wrongs against the environment, but we've been ignored for too long. And so that conversation has to be expanded, Megan. It has to be expanded in a way that's inclusive, that people understand that their very lives are at stake, that it's not just about wildness. And don't get me wrong. I mean, I'm surrounded here in my space by symbols of wildness. I love the wild. But we must also think about humanity in a way that doesn't put humanity at odds with the wild. That doesn't mean opening up the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge for drilling. By God, no. But it means informing people that there are better ways than petrochemicals to live our lives. So in thinking about how we break down this data, right? And so you hear me talking about the poets and the and the prophets, and as well as the professor being able to communicate what's going on. There's no question. I'm sure my friend Heidi would tell you stories of nuclear holocaust, essentially, that where cancer clusters exist because people do not understand what they cannot see until perhaps there is disease in their body or hair falling out or other things going on. So we fail to communicate the large. We fail to communicate the large to the single, so that the single person then is able to formulate their own agenda and a policy that then grows back out. And that policy grows back out because people refuse to accept communities that don't have clean drinking water. They refuse to let the industry in upwind of them that will then shove pollutants down their lungs for pennies on the dollar. So that's sort of my long-winded response to it, Megan, that it's a matter of communication and it's a matter of breaking data down. 900 pages of data is great. That's fine. I will tell you the most difficult problem my students have is at the end of a dissertation, 4 or 5, sometimes more years, you ask a student who's been in a defense for 2, 3, 4 hours, they know that the final question is coming, and I ask the question and I'll say, okay, you've done all this work, you're the expert. I'm going to give you 2 minutes right now. Please tweet out your dissertation. You've got 280 characters. Hopefully on your phone, you've got some picture of the beautiful thing that you've been studying. You've got something that in 280 characters you can relate to the world. I mean, it's the new elevator speech. It's the 3-minute thesis, essentially. And these people who've massaged all this data through complex statistical models cannot break the science down into palatable bits. And I'm sorry, if we just depend upon our peers to move policy, we know that it doesn't happen. So
Thank you.
Megan, I could talk on this for hours, but as you see, I get kind of exercised about it because it's important, to be able to see the world, to see Ashley Schiff preserve through David Taylor's poetry. That's data. That's data. And those beautiful words will evoke someone to feel and hopefully invoke them to action.
Beautifully said. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So I don't know if we want to go to Heidi next, had a question, and then after Heidi, we'll go to Mei Lin. So Heidi, if you want to unmute yourself.
Hi, thank you so much, everyone, for organizing this. Ashley Schiff Preserve folks, you did an amazing job, and you made a great choice in Drew.
Heidi, I lost you.
Well, she just got,
Unmute.
yeah.
Here I am. I don't know how to happen. I implored my students to come tonight.
Thank you.
Oh.
I
Great.
lost you. There. Okay, you're back.
Any case, my question is, if you could speak to, I know this is a little off topic specifically of Ashley Schiff, but if you could speak a little bit to the whole incident with Chris Cooper, which your piece in Orion, and I've heard you read and talk about this many times, about being a Black man and being a birder and how dangerous that's been for you at times. I think that's something most of us as white people don't have to think about. So it's just a really interesting position you have and that you've written a lot about. If you could share that with us a little bit, if you could speak to that.
Thank you. Thank you for the question, Heidi, and thank you for the wonderful work that you do. I call, well, I mean, that was an assault with a deadly word, right? And so as Christian was attacked by Ms. Cooper's words, there was the chance that if the police had responded, who do you think the questions would have been asked of? What would that have response have been like? I can tell you, as a Black man, having to answer questions about assault on a white woman would be, I mean, when we consider historical context, many people were hanged, lynched, and for that. So she knew exactly what she was doing, in my opinion. I think the records and what we know so far sort of bears that out, Heidi. But I write about that, these intersections of identity and nature, because our identities are these prisms that bend our perceptions of things. And so I would love to watch birds with both eyes in the binocular, and not one sort of constantly looking around to see how other people are perceiving me. And so I think that Christian's story of assault is important, because even last night I was on a call and we were having a conversation about birding while Black in the South. And I think my major point from that was, yeah, the South has a history, but the rest of the country has a history that's just hidden better. I mean, I mean, Central Park itself. I mean, Central Park sits on a former community of Black people that were displaced, so that there could be this green space to represent some aspects of wildness. So I tell people, Heidi, that it's important whenever we think about these current events, to not only think about the event that it's happened. And Christian was on the call last night, and fortunately, the police did not answer that call. But that thinking about current context, we always have to think about history. It's why I tell the stories of what was. But then thinking about how little maybe has changed, that someone would use that word essentially to scream help when there was no hurt being caused, to insinuate, and she said specifically, there's a Black man here that's assaulting me. And so she went to the lowest common denominator for many places in this country. So I like to remind people that hate and bias knows no region. And everywhere I've gone in this country to birdwatch, I've seen evidence of it. I've encountered it in places outside of the South. So I write about it a lot, Heidi, because it's important for folks to understand prisms. It's important for them to understand their own. And as I talk about range maps frequently, and sort of where we're comfortable, where we're not comfortable, where we can survive, where we can thrive, maybe those places that we fly over or fly around somehow because they're unsuitable. Oftentimes, the first responses of empathy will come from women who will say, yeah, I didn't feel comfortable in this situation or in that place, and so I avoided it, or I avoid running at this particular point in time or in this particular place. So we all have these prisms of identity that bend our perceptions of something, of life in general. But when it comes to nature, they are often complex. Some people see trees as things to swing in for amusement. Others see them historically as places that their ancestors swung from. And so when we think about the prisms that impact what we see, I think that's the way we move forward. And then we aren't making the mistake of assuming that everybody feels the same way. but then to bring it back to that commonality of same air, same water, same soil, same earth, same fate, that then brings us to a place of all of those things needing to be clean, needing to have potable water, needing to have clean air, needing to understand that ultimately, as different as we might all be as human beings, as individuals, we're all Homo sapiens sapiens, and our physiology requires those things. So that's why I tell those stories. It's not to parse apart and to just be bitter all the time, but for people to understand those prisms. And then in understanding those prisms, there can be some aspect of my life that you understand that perhaps you hold in common, or perhaps you begin to think introspectively about what your prisms are, what your biases are, what your privileges might be. So that's why I write in part what I write, Heidi. But I want to write about beauty. I want to write about the birds that inspire me, the birds that have me out there in the first place. And I try to wrap all of that together in ways that helps people understand that nature is important to all of us. It's just a matter of the prisms that we look through.
Great, thank you for answering that question for Heidi. So we'll go to Mei Lin next, and after Mei Lin, we'll go to Myra. So Mei Lin, if you want to unmute yourself.
Sure. Hi. So my question, I think I'm going to make it a little more complicated than I put it in the chat, but myself and a lot of other students are kind of probably feeling a bit exhausted at this point, because especially with the past presidency, last 4 years, we're constantly fighting for something. So we're fighting for environmental rights, we're fighting for civil rights, LGBTQ, women's rights. So how do you find balance between fighting for environmental causes and obviously the issues that have come up with like systemic racism and police brutality and all that kind of stuff?
Wow, that's Maylin, thanks for asking that question, and thanks for being vulnerable. I think in that gratitude of you being vulnerable, I think that's part of the solution. It's exhausting, and a lot of my writing has spoken to this exhausting state of constant fighting, of honestly, for me, the last 4 years of just worry. Not that I didn't worry before that, but I think this has been angst on a different level. And then it's compounded, obviously, by the pandemic, and then the other things, racial injustice, and so much more that's gone on. And so, how do you not? How are we not exhausted? Well, in many days we are. We're exhausted because a lot of the burden for all that goes on falls on the shoulders of underserved communities and the oppressed, who are often given the burden of proof for so much in this country. And so you carry that around on your shoulders. And the way that I escape some of that from time to time is I have to immerse myself in birds. I have a couple of places, and that's a privilege that I have, Maylin, honestly. I have to go to a place and immerse myself in birds. And for me, increasingly, it's not in just listing numbers of birds, different birds that I see, but perhaps concentrating on one bird, watching one bird. In my backyard at the beginning of the pandemic, I became infatuated with rose-breasted grosbeaks. And I would spend hours during the day, just sitting out with my phone and my computer because I was working as well. But these birds were sort of constantly coming and going. And I was thinking about those rose-breasted grosbeaks coming from Central America, coming across the Caribbean, coming up through the Gulf Coast, and finally reaching me here. And I'm thinking about these warblers that I would see, birds weighing only as much as a few paper clips. And I'm watching the grosbeaks and I'm watching the warblers, and I'm thinking about their evolved sort of courage, as it were, to make these flights across these waters, this air, and how they do it. And that inspired me, not to forget all the bad that was going on, but to see the beauty that remained, and to see that beauty, even if for a moment. I saw something flash across the screen there just a second ago, and someone said one step at a time, one thought at a time. And that's difficult to do, that one step, that one thought, because our minds are preoccupied with all of this other stuff that's going on. And so when I was sitting outside in my backyard, or when I go to my spot to watch birds out in pastures and fields, I can forget for a little while all the bad, just for a little while. And those moments, Maylin, that you can mix in, if you can mix in those moments, it's important. On the real, every morning, it's become like medicine to me. I have to do my yoga practice. I have to do that. And in those moments and I never thought that I would be one of those people who sits in front of my TV watching someone take me through this practice, but it's become important for me. And so the yoga now has begun to flow into how I watch birds, and that the birds are not just what's, but the birds are who. And it doesn't have to be birds. Maybe it is going out, finding some space where you can sort of disconnect for a bit, Maylin, and recharge for the fight, because we need you in the fight. But you need to understand that you're not alone, and you need to understand that you need to recharge. And so that's sort of the daily practice. I get to talk to my friend David, and we talk about, sort of the struggles, as we would want to call them, about this time, and just how heavy it is, how heavy it can be. I was trying to pull up a poem that I had that deals in part with this whole idea of the list that birders keep, but I called it a lifeless list. And in it, I basically say that there are days where it's hard for me to name the birds. It's hard for me to think about the names of some butterfly. It's hard for me to remember the names of wildflowers, because the names of murdered Black people who've been murdered by those tasked with serving and protecting, are on my mind, or the names of family and friends who have become ill or passed on because of a virus, or the names of people who I don't know who are dying needlessly because of politics. And so that's tiring. Ultimately, I need to pull back, and I can look at what I write. And I've been writing about colors. I've been writing about memories of colors, and the joy that different hues evoke. So I can go in my mind one step at a time, away from all the trouble, even just for a little bit. I think about Martin Luther King, and Martin Luther King, a lot of people don't know this. Martin Luther King spent a lot of time on a marsh down in Beaufort, South Carolina, at a place called the Penn Center. And Martin Luther King spent a lot of time down there, not only strategizing with Jesse and Ralph and others, but he also spent time there in nature recharging. And so that same air, same water, same soil, same earth, same fate, he recognized. He recognized. So take heart, Maylin. Know that you're not alone. Know that you have the capacity as a single person, right? Your agenda is your policy. You know someone else, I'm sure, who thinks just as fervently about equity and sustainability and a better earth, just like you. That's two people. That's how policy begins to move forward. So keep that in mind and take heart.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
That was
you.
great.
Thank you, Drew, for answering that question. So next we'll go to Myra, and then after Myra, we'll go to Chris. So Myra, if you want to unmute yourself.
Hi. First I wanted to say, Dr. Lanham, thank you for your talk. It was really good and wonderful. I am a student of color actually who grew up on Long Island. So when you were talking about talking about Ashley Schiff being a place of also protest, I thought that was just really powerful considering how extremely segregated Long Island is. We are like 15 minutes from Cold Spring Harbor, which is a wonderful lab, but also like the birthplace of eugenics, the GI Bill, just like, especially on Long Island, I think it's really important to reconcile with especially our history because it is a lot. So my question, I guess, is how do we incorporate anti-racism and these like practices and like acknowledging our history with conservation practices without making it the responsibility of solely BIPOC folk or folks of color? Because I feel like sometimes it sometimes falls disproportionately on folks of color who didn't even ask to be, like an educator in the first place. So I just wanted to hear your thoughts on the matter as a professor of color who is in this field.
Thank you, Myra, so much for your question. It's important for us, and this kind of dovetails with Mei Lin's question. Sometimes it's important for us to be quiet, to push back and to say, okay, let me see you do something, because I think, Myra, the people are a bit disingenuous, and people know when they do wrong, and they know the wrongs they do. Now, you give people a degree of latitude. Sometimes they don't, and they operate out of ignorance. But institutionalized racism anywhere, including in conservation and environmentalism, is frequently hidden by something I call pseudo wokeness, because you've got the right bumper sticker, or you voted for Barack twice, or you drive the right kind of electric car, that somehow you're off the hook. But then you've got a bag full of microaggressions that you carry around, that you're constantly throwing at people. And so in order for the movement to be joined, I think it's important sometimes for us to push back and say, you know what? It's not my responsibility to answer that question. It's not my responsibility to be, once again, the token on your committee, because you have not done your job of hiring enough BIPOC people, or bringing in BIPOC candidates to diversify your department or your organization. I mean, folks know, for example, when they're tokenizing, that they keep sort of replaying the same board member, or they keep replaying the same pictures of the same people of color. They recognize that, but because they're not holding one another to that standard, it often falls on us to say, hey, wait a minute, I'm the only one here. So I put the burden on those friends, those allies who know better. And so that, what's that TSA saying, or Homeland Security saying, I guess it is, see something, say something. No, see something, hear something, feel something, say something. I mean, people often run past their feelings, and organizations run past their feelings. Some organizations, quite frankly, don't want to change. They're satisfied with being who they are as long as the money flows in. And so they have to be called out. But being called out can't all fall on us. And so my example, Myra, I'll tell you, there's some pretty big stories with different conservation organizations and so on and so forth. But I get lots of call from media who want stories, and they're really pressuring for this story or that story. Guess what? I don't have to speak to you. I don't have to be your source to break this story. Go out, do your work, and find the information. So that's why I say sometimes being silent. You know, when I watch birds in the backyard, yeah, there are the birds that sing that are really obvious, but they're often birds that we never see, that are sitting a little higher, maybe out of eyesight, that are watching, that are learning, that are understanding the surroundings. If there's a predator nearby, or if there are competitors that they're going to have to deal with, and they watch. So I've taken sometimes to watching. And when people understand that you're watching with intent, they do differently. They behave differently. So I think part of what is happening and needs to happen is people need to understand, even when we don't speak, we're watching you. Like during Black Birders Week, all of those organizations, those listservs that came up and said, oh, keep politics out of birding. Why does it have to be about race? We were watching. We were watching. So silence sometimes is golden, worth more than gold, in fact. And people understand that they're being watched, and understand that there are consequences for their actions. So I don't know if that's if that helps, but I'll leave you with this. There are lots of organizations out there. There are lots of initiatives that have what I call silver-plated or silver bullet expectations, and those silver bullet expectations, though, are often followed by silver-plated intentions. They want one or two of us. They want a picture of us. They want a quick snapshot that makes it appear that they have done their due diligence. And all you have to do is scratch a little bit, or give it a little bit of time, and the tarnish comes through. So find those organizations and those people, those allies, who are silver bullet, who are solid. And I know people like that. I see them, for example, suffer in the trenches. I see them lose friends. I see them lose support, even as they do right. And as I watch them do right and suffer these sort of slings and arrows and suffering, I'm talking about being uncomfortable and doing right, then I know that's someone that will join the fight with us. Those folks who stand distantly and say, yeah, but yeah, it's really, really easy to say 3 words. That's why I don't judge people by what they say. I don't judge people by saying Black Lives Matter. If you say that, but then your actions show me otherwise, those are silver-plated words. So it became too easy. People saw those 3 words as as a sort of get out of jail card, and then they just kept on behaving like they had always behaved. Individuals did that, organizations did that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Thank you. I really appreciate that. Yeah, no. And when in like conservation spaces, it does feel like I have to now speak for all people of color, because I see like maybe 2 other folks. So I appreciate your words of just being like keep an eye out, like we're watching, and that's powerful in and of itself, and instead of taking the burden. So thank you.
Myra, at some point, and even if someone says, and it's amazing how this works. I sometimes, okay, I play these games. You're in a meeting and someone says, Myra, is there anything that you'd like to say? What do you think about this? If you say, you know what, I've just been listening and watching. I may have something to say later, but right now, I'm watching you. And you can hear the discomfort. So being in silence is cool.
I'm going to steal that from you. That's that's pretty cool. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I am going to interrupt at this point. I know Donovan said we were going to take a question from Chris, but we have 5 minutes left, and I would still like to make one more important point. First of all, I'd like to thank Malcolm for reminding us all about what a wonderful person Muriel was, and how she will be missed. And also thank the Schiff family, all of you guys, for attending. It's always makes me so happy to see you guys here. I'm going to share my screen one more time, and I'm going to hand the microphone over to Hogyam for a few minutes to talk about the work that our students do. Hogyam, I know you're going to talk about what the students do now, but I hope you will do the historic things that talk about the scholarship, please, if you don't mind.
Scholarships?
Yeah, I know you would. You're there.
So I noticed that there are many students and many current student volunteers who are attending the meeting today. And so this year we launched our first student volunteer program, and we have about like 25 to 30 students who are involved. And students write blogs, which is available on esherschiff.org, and you can directly communicate through the blog and see what kind of thoughts they're sharing, what kind of knowledge they're sharing. And also we have student volunteers and student naturalists who identify and survey the wildlife species in the preserve and take pictures. And there are many things that we're planning in the upcoming semester as well, including field trips, social distance to outdoor activities, and we also have a team of students who are working on scholarship projects and research projects as well. So since 2007 or more, there has been many topics that was discussed, focusing on Escher Schiff Preserve and Dr. Schiff's legacy, and from many different disciplines, including art, mapping, social sciences, natural sciences, and we value all of them. And the Friends of the Escher Schiff Preserve is here to support all the students to so make sure that they can use the legacy and the environmental assets that we have in the preserve as a living lab for the students, and we hope to shape their future, just like how it did for me, actually. So like, to me personally, the preserve was a life-changing forest. That's what I call whenever I talk about the forest. Because now it shaped my mind, and like Drew mentioned, think locally, think globally, act locally, or the other way. Like I think, like, to me, I think it works either way. Because as a student, I have to observe many thoughts, ideas, knowledge, and I'm shaping my future through the preserve and through the things I could get. Like Dr. Parker mentioned, 2017 we had a music project, and we are hoping to see more students applying for the program.
Thank you very much, Hogyam. Okay, in closing, I would like to say there has never been, if the pandemic has taught us nothing, especially over the last summer, there has never been a time in at least in my life, where the forest has been more important. In a time where gathering indoors was dangerous and maybe not the smartest thing you could do, many of us rediscovered the joys of the forest. I spent my own summer on the beach at Connecticut River State Park and in Ashley Schiff. Over this semester, a number of the friends have been guiding tours of students through the park, to showing them the geological history, the actual history, the natural history, the beauty of this forest. We would like to keep this forest forever wild, for students to continue to do their good work, for respite for the local community, and for students and faculty. Many of us use this forest as respite. We can't do it without your help. We can't fund our students without your help. We can't continue to lobby our legislators and our local Stony Brook administration without your help. So I'm going to end with, please love your forest, all of your forests, not just our forests, and contact Donna about ways to donate to us. And I can't thank Drew enough for this really inspirational talk and the thoughtful answers he's provided to all of the students and community members who asked questions. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Sharon.
I'm going to officially call this to an end, but if you guys want to hang out and until everybody's exhausted, I am not going to turn off the party. So continue to enjoy it as much as you want, but it is no longer moderated.
Sharon, I'm going to share a poem and then I have to go.
Okay.
But I wanted to share. I wanted to leave folks with this. It's called "Love for a Song." Love is barter. Love is bits of affection traded for pieces of adoration. Love is desire doled out on the whippoorwill's summer wanting. Love is our craving for the meadowlark's ringing song, our longing for spring's greening, from our sun-starved spirits down to our bare-toed roots. We seek the winding path and wander until we find the sweet spots, Blackwater cypress swamp, tall grass prairie sweep, that place where moonlight glancing off of tide-slicked stones makes us weep. We want the wild soul, and a shadow-dwelling wood thrush heaps it on us in self-harmonizing sonata. We revel in wildflowers' bloom. We marvel in the migratory sojourns of birds dodging falling stars. Sink yourselves deep in the dizzying dance of pollen-drunk bees. Find hope in the relieved canopies of the tallest trees. Wind and water, storm and surf, they can move us to other ends. Therein is the turn-on, the honey-sweet seduction. Nature asks only that we notice. a sunrise here, a sunset there. The surge, that overwhelming, inexplicable thing in a swallow's joyous flight, or the dawning of new light that melds heart and head into sensual soul, in that moment of truly seeing, that is love.
Thank
Very
you
nice.
so much.
Love to you all. Thank you so much. Thank you, Sharon. Thank you, Ashley, Schiff, Preserve, Friends of. Thank you, David, for being such a wonderful friend. Love you, Heidi. I look forward to a time when I can hug everyone. Right now, there's a virtual hug.
Thank you so much, Drew.
Bye.